obviously. But yeah. Yeah, so hey there. We were just talking about how it's been over 4 years since we did a podcast together, and it's kinda cool because, you're still traveling and doing all the fun things and creating really, you know, colorful art, and, I'm doing the same kind of things, but yeah, so anyway, we wanted to come on, so I guess just to give a little bit of background, you approached me on Instagram and said, "Hey, you're starting a podcast," and you had some questions, and you're like, "Why don't we make a podcast about making a podcast?" And I said, "Absolutely." So now we're here. But I guess, so can you give a little bit of background about who you are and things, and so people can kind of get to know who they're hearing and who's about to ask me questions?
Right. All right. Thank you. So my name is Ekaterina Sky, and I'm a visual artist. I identify as an impact artist, as I love to paint art that raises awareness about vanishing ecosystems of our planet. And I'm also a traveling artist. And in order for me to produce my work, I go into vows of silence. So spirituality is a big part of my practice. And all of the paintings, they come from visions that come through that.
Very cool. Okay, we should get into that a little bit because that's really interesting before we get into the how to do a podcast thing.
Okay.
So tell
Right.
me tell me more about everything you just said.
Okay, which part you would like to focus more on?
I guess, how did you find yourself getting into this? And, like, how long have you been doing this, and how long have you been doing the vow of silence? And
Mhm.
how did you get into that? How did you decide that this is what you wanted?
Right. Okay. So you probably know we live in the world of distractions, right? Something is always happening and it's pulling us to all these different directions. And, you know, there's always, we need to find excuses why we can't do something and etc. And so for me, what I've realized that I'm most productive and is when I'm in my own space, when nothing disturbs me, when my phone is off, when no one is talking to me. So that was step one. And then from another side, I also realized that, in order for me to listen for what is there for me to hear, I had to be quiet. I had to listen to my heart. And to do that, it was going into my spiritual practice. And I've realized that, like there's a lot of vipassanas and things like that where we can go for 10 days and you're in silence and you're in meditation, and which is a very beautiful practice. Yet I really wanted to do something that will be in my studio, where I had all of my tools, where I had access to all of my art supplies, because I was working on a project as well that is concerning Borneo rainforest, a rainforest that diminishes in catastrophic rate. In the last 20 years, they destroyed more than 50% of lowland jungle. Yeah. And
Wow.
as a woman, and like I don't have kids yet, and I remember at the time I was there and I was looking at the destruction. I was telling myself, if I want to bring a child into this world, I want to see a shift.
Mhm.
I want to see hope that there is a brighter future and that we will preserve our environment and nature that surrounds us.
Yeah.
And that was like one of the motivators, I would say, as a woman at a time. And when I started Vows of Silence, it was the most powerful experience. And I bet you not, it was so surreal because I literally started to have visions. Like I would wash my face and I would see Egyptians dancing in a circle.
Oh,
I know. I know. It sounds like out of this world, but have you ever done a very deep meditation where you start receiving visions?
no, but I'm interested in it.
All right. Yes, an artist. I would assume so. Right. So there are, how like I know some people, like they love to do certain things to receive visions and like to like
Mhm.
we don't have to do anything. We have access through our inner world to receive visions, to receive messages, and to connect to the spirit world. And I know that this is all outside of what we were about to talk,
It's okay.
but but the main thing was that within 1 year, I spent more than 100 days in silence.
Wow.
Yeah,
I love it.
it was the best gift I could have ever given to myself, because I was basically going through all of my childhood traumas. I was processing everything, like everything that was ever in the back of my mind running in the background that was distracting me. I was able to actually look at it and witness and process, cry through it if needed to, and then let it go.
Wow,
And
so
that
you
was,
did this to
yeah.
with yourself. You were just by yourself in your studio most of the time, so you walked yourself through all of this? I feel like a lot of somebody would need like a therapist to help them with this.
I remember, like, I did have a support, if anything, from, I have different shamans that would be like, like a support system. And I have a monk too. So I have many spiritual teachers in my life.
Okay.
And I remember one of them said to me, what you're about to do, is very brave. And I will see you on the other side. And if anything, call me. And of course, like my ego, I would not call anyone. And there would be moments where it's like, like grounding was important. It was important for me to be in nature. It was important for me to play musical instruments. And of course, painting, it helped me to go through this journey on my own. And everything that I've learned to that date through therapy, through different spiritual practices, through meditation, that was all the basis that helped me to get through. Because it was like a toolbox.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever something would happen, I was like, okay, what do I do now? And I would take it out of my toolbox. So it was really testing it out. And the most important test I think that came afterwards was when I came out of vows of silence. Because we can master anything when we are alone, but how do we show up when we are with others?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were prepared. Basically, what I'm hearing is you came into this knowing and having an idea what you were going to need to go through, and you'd had the tools prepared, and then you went through this. How many consecutive days did you do it at once? Or like how break this up for me?
30 days.
Whoa. Wow.
Yeah, it was a lot. But I was like, I feel like you're the same way. It's either you go big or you go home.
Mhm.
I was like, okay, if I do a week, okay, yeah, maybe sounds cool. But it wasn't like, whoa, like this is challenging. This is a challenge that I want to immerse myself into. So it had to be something beyond the norm.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, if you're gonna do it, just go big and go through it, go right through it. That's
Exactly.
awesome. Well, I like alluding to this, we're just scratching the surface of your art journey and all the things, but since you do have a podcast coming out, I'm sure you're going to be sharing things like this. And so anybody listening, if you're interested in this stuff, listen to her podcast that you're about to make. So let's chat about some of the hows to start a podcast. And so
Right.
I guess, yeah, what kind of questions do you have at first?
All right. So, first of all, well, can I just kind of go back to the podcast will be about artful impact. So
Okay,
how can we make an impact while being creative with it? And it feels a purpose that would can drive us further ahead in life. And so I would love to bring in different people from all different walks of life to be a part of it. And then spirituality, yes, that will be probably the basis of it all. Yeah.
great.
And so also, by the way, I'm halfway through your book.
Oh, okay.
You're amazing. Yeah, because I have an apprentice, and I felt like that would be a good. The way you teach is such a good way to you break things down very nicely,
Oh,
and I
thank
can
you.
see that you've done it so many times. And also, like I on your podcast, I've in your book, you did share a little bit about it. What inspired you to start your podcast? But can you please like tell us more a little bit about it? Because not every artist starts a podcast, right? Like our language is what we paint, but here you're using words, and I wonder what prompted it.
Yeah. So whenever I had the idea to start a podcast, at first, I just brushed it off because I had been listening to podcasts at that time for about 2 years. And I was thinking there are too many podcasts out there right now. I would be way behind in starting. And this is 5 years ago. But I was like, why? And I almost talked myself out because I was like, there's just so many out there. Like I'm so behind and there's already art podcasts. Why do we need another one? Like But ultimately, I just loved listening to podcasts so much. And before I would listen to music and to paint, and I would get really bored. And so podcasts are the thing. If I had a good podcast on, man, I could paint for hours. And it also quieted, I was thinking I probably need to do some kind of form of silence like you're doing to heal whatever's in there, because when I am silent for too long, I can't just sit there and paint, because I will just get aggravated in my head about random things that I probably need to address, but I'm not. I cover them up with podcasts. So I'm aware, but I'm not willing to do the work right now. One day. But yeah, so podcasts help me quiet my own mind and just think about something else. And they also motivate me a lot. There's so many times where, especially with women podcasts, I would plug something in and I just feel like they're more talking to me, and I could just relate. And it was just so great to hear women in business. And so I was like, why the heck not? I remember I was in the shower and I was like, what if I started a podcast, I would just interview all the artists that I've met and I worked with, and I would just ask about their stories, because when we were in person, they would tell me really funny oops stories that happened, and I was just like, oh, that would be so entertaining to just really deep dive into how they got started. That way I could pick apart how they got started, what they did, how they made sales, so that I could make sales. And so I just started interviewing people. I interviewed people I know first, and I was really nervous. And then I interviewed one girl, Murals by Whitney. I will never forget. I messaged her on Instagram and I was like, you just look really interesting. Can I interview you? And I was just so nervous. I remember I got hives the first like 5 podcasts. I would literally break out in hives because I went live on Facebook to do them. And but then after about episode 6 or 7, I stopped, having the hives. I stopped laughing at everything, like nervously giggling at everything they said. Like things just got a little bit better. And to now, I feel like I'm a much better interviewer now, especially compared to those even first 50 episodes or more. It's just yeah. So it's gotten a lot better. And I love connecting with people like you. Like I think I reached out to you to interview you. You just seemed like a very interesting person, and I loved your art, and now we're connected, and I love that too. There's some people that I don't connect very well with, like we're not really alike, but I still respect their art that I interview. But then some people I feel like we really connect. We're very similar. And I follow you guys on Instagram, and and sometimes people comment on my stuff too, and I'm like, you go girl. Like it's just a cool connection thing.
Right. And also I would love to express my gratitude to you, because like think about it, right? Like first of all, like let's say people in tech, they're always together, there's conferences, they're talking to one another, they're sharing what they were doing, and they're building upon one another. So technology is advancing, right? And then when we talk about artists, we are so isolated. We don't really talk to one another. Let's be real. Okay.
Yeah, and with that too, it's so funny though, because there's a lot of artists that I reach out to that just flat ignore me, or they just tell me, no, I don't like to do stuff like that. Like, because people don't like to talk on a platform, like especially artists. I was just talking to an artist he paints water towers, like to have the balls to go up and paint water towers. But he was like, I really don't want to be on a podcast. And I'm like, come on. Dude, I feel like
That
we
was
kind
so
of
interesting.
yeah, we do it to ourselves almost. Like I do it to myself. So that when you were saying, you in silence, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's such an artist thing to do, but it's so cool.
Yeah. So by you bringing artists together is actually very important, because now we can learn from one another. And the fact that you simmered it all down into a book,
Yeah.
you go girl. Thank you. We're moving artists forward.
Sure. Yeah, I'm just giving people the help that I wanted, really, because I remember being in college, I didn't know that they could make a profession out of this, and so I just didn't even take it seriously. And so I'm like, well, maybe if I interview, we have over 300 probably, yeah, almost 300 interviews. And now I'm
Oh,
like,
wow.
okay, you have three, yeah. So 300 artists to choose from. Like there's one of them that you have to, admire and can copy or whatever. Yeah.
Mhm. Amazing. Thank you for answering this question. And also, so what were the steps that, like, can you walk me through them? Sorry, let me rephrase it. Can you walk me through the steps you took to launch your podcast?
Yeah. So I started out interviewing people it was this free Artist Academy Facebook group that we have. And I would just invite artists in there and I would do the interview there and people would show up live and watch live and ask questions. And so I did it on the Facebook platform. And so I did not I guess this is more of a technical question or the technical
Is it
answer,
also
but it was what?
It's also great. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, so now I record on StreamYard and I can also stream it to Facebook if I want, or LinkedIn or YouTube or wherever from here. But there's a much, much higher quality of sound coming from StreamYard where I record it. But back then I would just record it straight on Facebook and the quality was terrible. And but people listened anyway. They didn't seem to care as much. I mean, I think you could hear the difference between now and then. But yeah, I just went live on Facebook and then I saved that Facebook live and I added an intro and an outro to it and edited it just a little bit, barely any at all, and I put it out. And so although I recorded, I think it was 5 episodes, so an intro episode and 4 or 5 interviews at once before I put it out. And I've heard that I don't know if I got that advice or if I just randomly did it. But either way, it was that I would recommend that now because now I know that whenever you put your podcast out there, you want to have listeners have to have more than one episode to listen to, and it also helps you rank really highly to put it out there. You're promoting it, like you're spreading it around, and people are listening to usually a few episodes at a time, so you're getting several downloads at once. There's a lot of hype, and through that I ranked in the arts section of Apple Podcasts. And that was a big deal. It's really hard to do that now. I'm far from one of the top podcasts out there, but I mean, we do well. But so I would say anybody doing it, just, record a couple of solo episodes, record a couple interviews. The first solo episode I did, I actually had to write it down because I couldn't ramble like I do now. It was very hard. I used a lot of filler words. I'm talking like and just all, and I do now still a little bit, but it was really bad back then. So yeah, so I would say record a few and then put it out there. The best way also to promote your podcast is to be on other people's podcasts. Hands down, that's the best way. I've done that in the past. I do that as much as I can now. And because if somebody listens to podcasts, they are way more likely to turn to your podcast from another one. Promoting on Instagram, promoting on Facebook helps, but it's very hard to get people to switch platforms. I've noticed it's very hard to share something on Instagram and have them leave Instagram and go to Apple Podcasts or whatever. It's very hard to make that switch. I still do it, but being on other people's podcasts is definitely the route to get your podcast out there.
Wow, I have so many other questions now that just popped up. Well, so first of all, what I feel like you're saying is that have a plan and release first a few episodes at once, because then also I heard from someone that if you release, for example, 3 podcasts at the same time, then let's say you have 9 people that you funnel towards your podcast, so it's going to give you, way more views at the same time if there's 3 of them versus if you just release 1
Yeah.
when you begin. And so I have technical questions, and then I also should we dive now into technical? Would you be
Sure.
comfortable with it?
Yeah.
Okay. So so you said you recorded now on what's the name of the
StreamYard. Yeah, so it's just
StreamYard.
streamyard.com. Yeah.
Okay. So you recorded now on StreamYard. And so for when you do record it, as we do now, we do it through our computers on each side. I can see you have a microphone on your end,
Mhm.
right? And then like, what will be your process? Like, like, I know scheduling the call, like, can you guide me through like the beginning? Like you reach out to people, then like you send them out, whatever, and like, and then how you like edit it and then put it out. Could you please guide me through the timeline and the
Sure.
flow?
Yeah. At first, I would just reach out to artists that I liked on Instagram. And nowadays, I put a post in the Artist Academy in our Facebook group, and I say, "Hey, what are artists you admire that you would want me to interview?" And so they make a list and they send links, and I have my virtual assistant now go to there, and I have her reach out to every single one. If a person in the academy recommends somebody, we reach out to them. That doesn't mean that they're going to say yes or they respond or anything, but I reach out to them, and the ones that do and say yes, I would like to be on the podcast, I send them a link to Calendly. So it's just calendly.com, and it has my typical process of, hey, to be a guest on the Artist Academy podcast, this is what it entails. I give all the details. We're going to be on video and audio, and just tell them all the details. I'm going to send them a link, then this is the date, and then they pick the date. I have several dates open on Calendly, and they just pick one that they want. I have it rolling for months and months. And so a lot of times artists will say, I have a show coming up in 2 months, can we do it after that? And say, yeah, sure, pick a date. And half the time I'd say people forget to pick a date, and they just look at it, they're not sure, and then I have my virtual assistant follow up on them later and say, hey, you said you were ready. Did you pick a date already, or go, or whatever? And so then the Calendly will automatically send them an update 24 hours before, so they know. And then I will send them a link to this room, just like I sent you the link. It's just a StreamYard link, and I send them the link a few hours before we go on. And that also helps to remind them. I send it to them on Instagram, so I usually reach out to people via Instagram direct message, and I do that because I have several thousand followers, and it helps for people. It helps just for people to see that, okay, she maybe knows what she's doing. Like, yeah, I want to be on her podcast. Great. And so I use that way over email. But I'll send the links in email and whatnot. And then we do the interview and say, thank you so much. Usually I'm scheduling out at least a month. So I'll tell them that, and I'll say, whenever it goes live, we email you. So I have my virtual assistant send an email to them from us and say, hey, your podcast is live today. It's live on all platforms, but they send them a link to it. I also have her say, now we're going to be tagging you on Instagram. It would really help spread the word of the podcast if you could reshare all the things that we tag you in, and it's just on their story, so it's really not a big deal. And they usually do. So that also helps just get the word out. As people, I get a lot of time. I actually just had somebody apply for the Academy today, and they said that I interviewed an artist that they really admired, and that's how they found me. Because every time somebody applies for the Academy, I'm like, where are you coming from? And some people just say Instagram, or some people say podcast, but sometimes people say very detailed things like that, and I'm like, oh, good, thank you.
And so you've done the interview, right? And then when it's done, it's complete, right? Like we are getting off, let's say, the computers right now.
Okay.
What will be your process, right? Like, what would you do with the file, and then like, how do you like then put it out there into the world so there's actually streams?
Yeah, so I download it now. Yeah, I download it. So I have it recorded on 2 tracks. So your audio is recorded on 1 track, and then my audio is recorded on a different track. So I download those 2 tracks and I upload it into Dropbox. And my virtual assistant and my podcast editor both have access to Dropbox, and so they can get in there and get whatever I put in there at any time. I also have it's a Google folder with all of the intros written out and the schedule. So after this one, I will put this interview in, and I'll say end of July, on this specific date. I'm not sure exactly when it's going to come out. So I'll say July 12th or whatever. And that's not the date. It's I'll put it on there, and I put the description in there, which is usually about a paragraph or more, maybe 2 or 3. And I have a podcast title, and that's on there and with the date, so that my podcast editor and my virtual assistant know what's coming up. They know that they have an email to prepare. They know that they need to edit it and whatnot. And sometimes I'll like even go, we communicate in Slack. And so I will message them and say, hey, I just uploaded 2 podcast episodes, edit it whenever you want. And so he takes out some of the filler words. He puts the intro and whatnot on it, and then we upload it into wait. Oh yeah. So we switched it. I used to upload into Spreaker. So Spreaker, Spreaker. I did that for years and years, and I recommend that. So you upload it in there, and it will walk you through how to upload it, and then you add the description in there and you add everything, and you have to set up your channel, and you have to connect your channel. So like my channel to Apple Podcast, I have to connect it to Google Podcasts, to YouTube, to all the streamings areas. And then once I connect it all, so it's a bit of a work up front, but once I connect it all, as soon as I upload a podcast episode, I click where I want it to stream, and it will automatically do that on the date that I set it. So yeah, Spreaker does that nowadays. So I have the Artist Academy on this platform called Kajabi, and Kajabi now has its own podcast platform included in my plan. So I don't do Spreaker anymore. It was like $100 a year. It's not a crazy amount, but now that Kajabi has it, I just do it through there. It's the exact same thing. Like every podcast platform is very similar. It'll do all the work for you. It's pretty easy.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And so I understand the process for the audio files. And what about video files? And then like, do you also do reels that then go onto your social media platforms?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I forget that there's so much to this, really, because we're so streamlined. Yeah, so here on StreamYard, my virtual assistant can access this video that we're doing right now, and she will download it. And we upload that one into YouTube, because YouTube is primarily the video platform for doing podcasts. But I don't put video on any other platform like Apple or whatnot right now. We just do audio there. But she can also take this video and she will put it into this AI tool that edits. So it's called Opus, Opus. I'm pretty sure if you just Google Opus clip, you can get into there, and it's just this video editing tool. So she will take this whole interview and she will upload it in there, and that AI tool will pick out certain sections, maybe like 20 to 30-second sections of the best information that it thinks that is there, and it will put captions to it. It will do the whole thing, and it edits it. I used to try to kind of do it myself, and then I trained a virtual assistant to do some video, and then I found this was about over a year ago, and we use this now, and it's great because it gives you so many different ones. Like it gives you what it thinks might be the best one, but oftentimes the best one is not actually the best one. So I like to comb through it. I have her comb through it, really, and she will pick out the most educational, the most entertaining, like some clips, and then we share it to Instagram story, and that's what we tag the guests in, and hopefully they reshare it.
Mm-hmm. I see. Thank you. So then the video that's going to be uploaded to YouTube, is it edited at all, or is it raw as it was?
So the video that I upload to YouTube is raw, and I say that in the caption. I also upload to YouTube a separate one of the edited version of the podcast, though, so they can listen to the edited audio or the video. The full video is just the raw one, and usually it just has more filler words. It's like not that it's not that different.
Right. And do you find it's beneficial to post to YouTube, or like does it add any?
I've had people tell me that they listen to it on YouTube. Yeah, I have the most streams from Apple Podcasts for sure, but YouTube, I just this year started to work on YouTube a little bit more, and it's not my main thing. Instagram is my main thing, but if YouTube is your main thing, YouTube is very much working itself towards they want to be the main podcast platform. So I would highly recommend putting more effort than even I do into YouTube.
All right, thank you. All right. So the next question would be, what are the key elements of creating engaging content for your listeners?
Yeah, so I think it's just nailing down what my customers want to hear. And it's so, or my listeners anyway, and it's so different. Everybody has different personalities and wants, but having a art business podcast, I find that, and through looking at downloads from past episodes, is when we share things about money, things about tangible things to make money, to sell the art, that's what people respond to the most. Although I say that, but we've also, some of the best episodes have been a lot of the emotional side of it too, and just making, just bringing to light some of the insecurities that artists have and helping them overcome it, just making them feel they're not alone, things like that, that really get into it. So I try with my guests to really get into, like, okay, how are you actually making money with this? And how did this make you feel? Things like that, that people can relate to and that people really want to know, not just hearing their story.
Interesting. So you base it upon your audience and also your personal experience too, probably, of what is that you would want to hear, right?
Yeah.
Especially in the beginning of your career.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I
Awesome.
find that stories are, artists, they're like, whenever somebody can tell a story to back up their point. So a lesson that they've learned the hard way, or, instead of just giving advice of do this, why? Where is that advice coming from? What is the story behind it? Stories can really help, especially us artists. We are very imaginative. We can see things in our heads, and it's just like you envision the story being told, and that's entertaining, and people like that.
Right. And also, like, I've noticed you do a lot of that in your book as well. You're very good at sharing the stories and examples from your life, which are very entertaining, by the way.
Good, good. That's actually, I think, from doing the podcast so long, that actually helped me write the book, really, like interviewing so many people and knowing how to tell the story. And I looked up how to write a book before. I was like, what are the steps to write a book? And it was like, make your points and then say the stories behind the points. And I was like, okay, great. Kind of just like a podcast. So it was the same.
That's great. All right. And I feel like we kind of went over it, but let me know if you would still like to answer it. How do you select and prepare for your guests and topics?
Yeah. So, yeah, we message people really. So nowadays, there's a lot of times where I'm going into an interview of somebody that I'm not even really sure who they are, because I had an artist academy member recommend them, and then my virtual assistant reach out to them. So I'm just getting a little brief of it, and I think it's just a way to like cut the workload down. But sometimes I get an interview where I'm like, ooh, that wasn't that interesting. I probably should have vetted them before. But more often than not, like, some people surprise me. And so I try to interview everybody and give them a shot. And sometimes the episodes get, edited down quite a bit because there's a lot of really uninteresting things in it. But most of the times it's pretty good. But I just look at their Instagram and I go and watch videos and I look at their art style, and I can pretty quickly assess, what they're about. If it's murals, then I know what to talk about. I started out having a set list of questions because I was so nervous in the beginning. I was like, what are we going to talk about? Oh my gosh, I'm not a big conversationalist, in person, if I'm not really interested in what they're saying. But I mean, art is very interesting. But yeah, I just had a list of questions. I asked everybody the same questions, I want to say, for the first like 100 episodes. And then I asked my audience, how can I make this better? And someone was like, maybe switch up your questions. And I was like, oh, okay. So nowadays, I typically get on, we will get on, and before I press record, I'm like, if we could focus on what you are best at, that's what I want to talk about today. And so I tell them, is there one thing? And I give the example of, I'm really good at making video and growing my audience like that. And I really like to talk about money. So what is your thing that we can really dive into, that people can get the most value out of? Like, what's the best advice that you have? And so sometimes they tell me right off, and sometimes I'm like, just if you have it and you're ready to go, let's go. And so they surprise me. There's a lot of times I don't do a ton of research into people. I'm just like, you tell me, and then I can ask questions.
I see. And does it ever happen to you that the person asks you for questions up front? Because I remember in your book as well, you mentioned the story of how, like, You remember when you were on the TV, live
Yep.
TV, and then you were like, okay, from now on, I have to know my questions ahead of time, right? So does it ever happen?
Yeah,
But yeah.
so I actually have set questions on the Calendly link, and I sometimes like they're ones of that are basically like, how do you get customers? How do you price your arts? Things like that that I will naturally just ask, but I give them those set questions and I let them know, hey, for the first 5 minutes, tell me about yourself, and then I'm going to ask questions about your business. Like, are there any business practices? So I give them questions. I don't necessarily ask all of them, but mostly are just like centered around business.
All right. And so what technical equipment and software do you recommend for beginners, and what platforms and help you use for editing and release? So you already kind of answered these questions. And the thing how I would love to pivot it is, do you ever do interviews in person? And do you find there's a difference in the quality of the podcast and the viewership if it's in person versus if it's online?
Yeah, so in person, you definitely get way more personable, but that is also so much more time of driving, setting up in meeting. It's so much easier to hop on this like a Zoom call kind of a thing. I've done a couple in person, mostly with friends. Like my best friend Samantha, she's a local artist, and we've done a couple together. And I'm like, well, we might as well just do it here together because you live here. So but other than that, it's like primarily on video or just on video chat.
I see. Okay, thank you. Because I was thinking to start in the studio in person for like the visual
Oh,
component of it,
yeah.
but also like now doing this with you online, I'm like, that feels so good. It's just it feels so much easier, right? There's less setup, and it's like you just click a button, and here we are.
It's
And
very easy. Yeah, I tend to go towards the easy route. And even though if the quality might be a little bit better with other ways, I'm like, but what's easy? Mostly because easy is going to make sure I'm do it, and it's because I do have to do 4 episodes a month and I typically batch them. I will
ooh,
typically do, yeah. So I do 1 episode every single week for over 5 years. I have not missed a year, a week ever. I put them out on Mondays, and there's some episodes we've done 2 a week a couple times where it was beneficial. Like if we just did May Mural Month where we did 8 episodes in the month, and I know, but those were ones where I was like bringing back some old episodes in there too, and so it wasn't too crazy. But yeah, 1 episode a week. But I typically do. I've heard some podcasters can do like 8 episodes a day, and that seems crazy. But I mean, back before I had a kid, maybe. But now I find that for quality purposes, I can only really sit on 4 episodes a day because after that, I just get a little restless. My butt starts to hurt. Like I just need to move around, and the quality of conversation just kind of dips too because I get less interested in it. So I do 4 episodes in one day. Usually I'll do 2 episodes a day and spread it out to like I'll do two episodes on a Monday, 2 episodes on a Tuesday, and then that next Monday I might do two episodes as well. And then that's it for the month. So I try to get his head as much as possible, but there are also times where I'm doing an episode and it airs 2 weeks later. And then there's sometimes that I do an episode and it airs 2 months later. It just kind of depends on life.
right. And so why do you do it so often? Like, what are the benefits of it that it brings to you?
Yeah, so consistency is huge. So whenever I first decided I was going to start coaching artists with business, I took a course. So, I drank my own Kool-Aid with this. I was like, okay, I'm going to create a course or a membership. I need to consume one. And that's the best way to learn, right? Is to jump into somebody else's course and somebody else's group, Facebook groups, all the things, and see what they do. And so my mentor, my online mentor that she stressed to create something that lives online uh, uh, consistently. So that basically that could mean, setting up a web page with a blog with something once a week, or just doing something. And I decided to go with a podcast and just something that compounds because you post something on Instagram, a reel, it dies after so long. People aren't going back to reels and learning from them, but they are. I mean, YouTube is really good about that too. Like, it lives on forever. Instagram posts are not, Facebook posts are not, podcasts do, blogs do. So it's like, pick your thing and show up consistently with it. And so
Mhm.
that's what I did. I just, every week, and I was given the advice too, and stressed, the more seriously you take your thing, like showing up every single week, the more seriously people are going to take you. And so like, I knew that if I wanted to come in and fail, I would, make one episode here, there, not show up. And I wanted to make it a real thing. Like, I wanted to show artists too, and just be the like the example of, what it is to build a business. That it's consistent. It's not sexy. And sometimes I'm like, gosh, but so often, I'd say every single time. Sometimes I'll wake up on a Monday and I'm like, okay, I have a podcast episode today. And sometimes I'm like, gosh, I don't feel like talking. But at the end of the podcast episode, I feel so great. It's so fun to
Oh,
talk about art, but sometimes it is hard to make myself do it.
right. It's like exercising, right? And
Yeah.
and and talking about consistency, like especially in the beginning when we start a new thing, and the numbers starting low, and there's like it
Mhm.
takes time to get into gear, and I know many people give up right before it actually reaches a certain a satisfying number of people that are actually engaged. Would you
Yeah.
have any advice on how to push through and stay consistent as you go?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, what I did was, so I'd been listening to podcasts for a while, and a lot of the podcasts that I listened to, by the time I found them, they already had 100 episodes or more. And so that's why I was like, I'm so behind. And like, but I was also looking at that and I was like, okay, I didn't find these episodes on episode one. Like, I didn't find these amazing podcasters in their early days. I found them after episode 100. And then I got to go, listen to all the episodes behind, and then listen weekly as well, and I loved it. So I was like, okay, I can't expect everybody to find me on episode 1. So I had it in my head. I was like, if I can just get to episode 100, which sounds like a lot, and it is, but I was like, okay, so I did 1 to 2 episodes a week, because I was like, I just want to get to episode 100, because then I'm going to be doing amazing. Like, I set a goal. And I remember I got to episode 100 and I'm like, I mean, we're doing okay. We're doing well. But then, so when I did get to episode 100, right, I was much better interviewer, and I had a system down. I had an editor. I was like, okay, this is a bit easier. So then I focused more on quality. I went back and I looked at my download numbers, and I said, okay, what did the best? I threw spaghetti at the fridge, or whatever it is. Like, I did all these different things. Like, what did people like the most? And then I just doubled down on what people liked. And so, like, I think in the first while, you're just throwing stuff out there and seeing what people resonate with, and you're practicing yourself. And I think if you listen to any podcaster's first 10 episodes, you're gonna be like, ooh, okay.
Oh, that's what's awaits for me. Uh, all right, so I guess goal setting is very important, right? And
Mhm.
because that's what kept you going, and that's actually what made you extra motivated and made you produce more.
Yeah,
That's
because practice makes perfect is what it was.
right. Okay. Um, how do you promote your podcast and grow your audience?
So we do it on Instagram. So I just leverage my Instagram. I should be creating more stuff on Instagram. I pretty much post about the podcast every other day on my story. I don't. My virtual assistant does. Thank you, Anne. But it's on her list of tasks to do, and we do it in a couple different ways. But I've toyed with the idea of putting it on my actual grid on Instagram. We post little clips on Facebook, but really, my email list is the thing that I think helps with just being consistent. That's another thing. I also was told in the beginning that, in order to if you produce something every single week, that compounds. So having that, just the key to that is compounding, and every week. like two things that aren't going to just disappear, and it's going to stay consistent. You need to have a way to show, to put it out there that's not just social media, because social media fluctuates. It could be shut down at any time. Like, it needs to be something else. And so I was mentored into getting an email list and starting that and having that consistent. And so I send out every single week whenever the podcast airs. I just send out the title in the caption, and then the body of the email is the description. And then we add a photo to that as well. And we send a link to, hey, you can listen on Apple Podcasts, or you can listen on YouTube or whatever. And so that just gets sent out. And I write the caption, and then I write the description, and I write the title, and those things get used in the email as well. So I send out an email. And how I get people on my email list is I ask them if on Instagram, on my story, if they want to join my email list. That's why I did it. And if they want to keep up to date. But I also give out freebies. So I give out a free supply list for artists, for muralists, and I give out a free pricing guide to help people price their art. And I found that those two things are what people want. They want to know how to paint, what I'm using to paint, and how to price and how I'm pricing. And so I give them a little bit of that, and then they get on my email list. I send them free podcast episodes every single week, and then hopefully they listen. And yeah, and then now I have my book, and then I have the membership. And so those are ways that I actually get paid. I have entertained the idea of monetizing it with ads, but really I'm just not that interested in it. The download numbers aren't in the millions or anything like that. I mean, I think we're approaching like 300,000 total in downloads. Yeah, which is great. And we get about 1,000 a week in general. So I don't know how much I would make on ads, but really I think monetizing it with just getting people into the academy, if they decide they're done with the free content and want the templates and want more help and the videos and stuff like that, that it's only $37 a month, and they can cancel at any time. It's very inexpensive. And there's also my book. I sell it for $17, the audio version, or you can get it on Amazon and Audible. But those very low cost things are ways that funnel people into that. And I think the podcast, it just helps people get to know me. You hear my voice, and you gain that trust factor, and they get to see that I actually know what I'm talking about. And they're like, okay, I got a bunch of stuff for free actually. So I listened to this podcast called the Boss Babe podcast, and
my friends.
Yeah,
go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I love it. And listening to their podcast, it's just now it's one girl who we're pretty much the same age. She has a baby too now, and like I feel like I've grown with them, and I'm in their membership, and it's like $32 a month, and it's just like very similar to mine. But like, and I use their membership a little bit, but I've gained so much from their podcast that I'm like, I'm just gonna keep paying you, because thank you for so much value. It was like that podcast is one of the first ones that I ever heard of, like, women in business that sounded just like me, very just happy-go-lucky and friendly, but also down to business. And I was like, that's just, and they're my age, and I'm like, oh, that's great. So that's what I hope is I can give back to another artist, even just a girl like me that's just very happy-go-lucky, but also like ready to make money.
All right. Yeah, and that's what I think we need more examples of that as well, right? And now that you're a mom too, and you're doing all of it, that's impressive. And you're still painting, you're still creating, and still doing your podcast. And you said you didn't miss, any podcast episodes, and you have a child. I mean, just for that, that's incredible.
Thanks. Yeah, I took a lot of time to batch. I think I was ahead like 4 months when I had my son, because I was like, I wasn't sure when I was gonna go. And now, if at all possible, I'm gonna batch like 6 months with the next one, just to have that more time, because the hormones are just crazy after you have a kid. And I was like, what am I doing?
Well, both babe right there, batching for 4 months. That's incredible. Okay, and so you kind of answered the question about the monetization. And so would you suggest having a product somewhere to funnel people to, if you're making a podcast. So therefore, there's a way to monetize it, if not to go through the ads.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the best way. Like ads are all right. Um but I think that's the key to social media too. I think that's the key to having any large audience is having something that people can buy when they find you, whether it's something small or large or whatever. I mean, selling online like that is a whole nother thing. Like it is there's so much that goes into sales pages and like just using the words to describe there's so much into it. I thought about even like creating a course about how to do that because of it. I'm like, no, just stick to how, training artists how to sell art. But because it's so interesting, just the whole back end of it. But yeah, any product, any digital or physical product that for people to buy, like it just entices. It also helps like because putting out content like this is like nobody does anything for free, hardly. It's very unmotivating to not get paid at all. Because even like doing a free mural, we love to paint, but after the first day, you're like, okay, I want to like go do something else, or it just you just get tired of it, and there's no motivation to keep doing it. That if there's no paycheck at all, like or is yeah, so something.
Okay. And so I have two questions, kind of like to circle back. One of them was that you mentioned that you don't do reels with your podcasts. And is there a reason why?
I have a really high standard for my reels, and I know that I would have to so I've experimented with it a little bit. It's a lot of work to create the kind of reel that I want that I know would do well. It's a lot. The interview that I did with Samantha earlier this year, we did it. We were together, and I created reels for that. And I sat down, and they performed all right. Also, like videos of my art perform really well, especially big murals. But I know that podcast talking like that performs all right. It's not as good, but in order to make it really good, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of editing. It takes it to be a really, really good clip. And it's just a lot more time. I should do it, but I just don't know that I'm willing to do all of that, put in all that time right
Doesn't
now.
Opus do that? The application that you
Yeah,
spoke.
they do a good job, but I think in order to make a reel, it would need to be really interesting. It's just that Office does that, and I think those are good enough for Instagram stories. But for a reel, I think they would flop. I think they would get a very low views compared to what I'm used to, and it's just not as interesting as content then as that. And doing that, I would do that, but then it brings down the views on my other videos, because once you upload a video on Instagram, and if it does really well, it assumes that the next video you upload is going to do really well too, and you get a little bit of a boost there. But if you upload one that does really bad, the next video you add also assumes it's going to perform very similarly to the one before. And so putting out a podcast clip on as a reel, I think if I had a dedicated like Artist Academy podcast account, I would do it there, but I don't, and I don't like to manage more than one. Again, I think it just creating a workflow system that's really easy. And I think having 2 pages to manage is just way more than I can do. I get overwhelmed easily-ish with just adding. It's so easy to add so many things to my plate.
There's
Like,
artists. We are so good at it.
and I added and added and added for so many years, I feel like. And because I started with painting and then murals and then coaching, and I did a podcast and I did the membership and then I wrote a book, and I was just like, and then I was like, okay,
And now, baby.
yes, exactly. Now, and now I have hit my plateau of things that I can add, and I know that. And I'm like, okay, like let's try to even maybe subtract something and do less but better is now what I'm trying to do. Which doing reels of the podcast, I just need to make them really good. So I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out.
Right, right. Because could your assistant do it, or?
No. I'm very particular. I would have to get a video editor, and which would be another expense, which would be beneficial. Like I don't know if the expense well, it might. I mean, adding a video editor would bring in the more than the amount that I would pay them. Surely. That's probably a good idea. What I think would do really well is having a clip of an artist who is giving advice, but also sharing, like putting in clips of them painting as well, and their best videos that they have. So taking a clip of them giving really good advice in a really short amount of time, plus adding clips of them creating their art in there, so it's not just an artist talking with captions. I think that is the key to having a good, because you need to be able to entertain visually, right? That's the leg up that we have as artists. We can, we entertain it with a paintbrush. And so it's really hard for my audience who really just wants to be entertained with a paintbrush, really, like the majority of them do. And so to add just an artist talking about something, that just, it doesn't perform as well. So I think that is the key, and that's just the effort that I haven't put in yet. And so maybe in the future, I might today sit down and just be like, okay, I'm just gonna try it. I'm gonna add in a lot of clips of art because I know I should. It's one of those should items.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. Um, so, what advice would you give to someone who is nervous about interviewing guests? And for example, I can speak for myself here. I'm terrified, okay? I'm like, oh my God, I don't know. I don't know. English is my fourth language. So far from the first. So I know that it's not perfect. And also, I'm in conservation and spirituality category as well, besides just art. And there, like at times, we need to be very careful about the words that we use, and like how things are being portrayed, so no one gets offended, so everyone is like agrees with what is it that you're saying. And the part of me is like, we're all learning. No one truly really knows anything in this life. And
Yeah.
so, right? Like we have this like nutritional fact, like eat this and this is bad for you. And then 10 years later, we're like, oh, by the way, that wasn't true. So, so how, so I wonder if there's a way to like add a disclaimer or anything like that, saying that, like I'm an artist and I'm learning and I'm bringing you on like with my journey, and like basically like how would you navigate if you would be me, and what would be your way of navigating something like this?
Yeah, so how I would approach it is in the first 10 episodes, and then after that, you can just, do it differently. But, you say, hey, I am kickstarting this podcast, and just be open. I have a set of questions, and I am very new to interviewing. And so, but my intentions are really great, and I just compliment them too. Everybody loves a compliment. like I admire your practice, and just get them all buttered up. Like they'll love that. Yeah, just if you're nice to somebody and compliment them, they will. They also just being open, and I mean as relaxed, I guess, as you can. I will say though, I've learned something in approaching people. If you're too much like, oh my gosh, you're like my idol. Oh my gosh. Then like I love everything you do. Will you please grant me the privilege of interviewing you? Like if you're too much like that, they come in all high and mighty. And they're not as relaxed with you, and they're not as like, they're most like, I am, you're in my presence. I'm like, because artists are so funny like that sometimes. So if you like just kind of try to in the beginning, I don't know, just tell them a little bit about who you are, while not like also while not making it about you, So like I was interviewed a couple times, and the interviewers just kept talking and talking and talking, and I was like, why am I here? Like, and I've also learned to just shut up and let my guests talk a lot of the time. Like, I mean, this podcast is different because you're asking me questions, but on the majority, I try to say a little bit, but I actually try to say very little in interviews. I just let them speak, and I'll just agree and say a little bit why, and ask the next question. But yeah, just shut up and letting them shine is a good one, and just maybe hyping them up, but not too much.
Uh-huh. Moderation.
Yeah, exactly. And you'll get it. That I would say start with people who you are comfortable with, people who are on your level. Because I've interviewed some artists where they were above my level. Like I remember back in the day I interviewed Maria Brophy and she had already written a book and she was just oh
You
yeah,
interviewed her?
she was so cool. Yeah, and I was just like,
I
"Hi,"
love
and
her.
she was just like in her book, and I was like, "Oh my gosh." And since then I've interviewed, yeah, her husband Drew as well, and we met we comment on each other's stuff sometimes on Instagram and Facebook, which is like the most amazing thing. Now doing a
Oh.
podcast and whatnot. Yeah, and they interviewed me on their thing. Like it was cool. And then I interviewed Kelsey Montague, her sister, Courtney.
Mhm.
And so it was like just things ones like that where I was very nervous, but it's yeah. But start with somebody who you're comfortable with. Like the first one I did was my best art friend at the time. We did an interview together, and it was I was very comfortable because I knew her and I knew the questions to ask to really get out what I thought would be interesting. And
Mhm.
then I worked up to people who I didn't know. I was
Mhm.
like, okay, hi.
Uh-huh. I see. You build it up, which makes sense because you get more comfortable and then you kind of you loosen up. And I guess here it's not about finding our voice. It's about giving ourselves permission to use it,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And
And it's just
uh-huh.
yeah, the little bits of advice that people give, sometimes they really stay with me.
Mhm.
And yeah, you just never I interviewed somebody yesterday and he gave some tips on how to like what questions to ask your customer and whatnot. I was like, that's a good idea. Man. Like, you think you've interviewed over 300 episodes with all these people giving advice, and sometimes I still hear new stuff all the time. That's cool.
That's beautiful. And actually, like that would be the next question, like how you keep it interesting and fresh. And
Yeah.
I guess the people bring it to you, right? It's like because it's
Mhm.
their story, it's their journey. And I
Yeah.
have one, yeah, I have
Yeah. I
one
was
last,
like,
yeah.
oh, sorry. I say actually lately I used to do a bunch of solo episodes and
Uh-huh.
lately I haven't because I just haven't felt like I'm kind of in my like momming gardening era where I'm like I'm still doing the painting stuff but it's not my like main thing and so I'm feel a little bit less like so I haven't been doing a lot of solo things. I feel like I don't have the energy lately to really show up and be like go get them. Yeah, blah, blah. Like I have just more of like a calming energy lately. And I just interview other people and I'm like, cause they have it. I'm like, and I know how to get it out of them. And I'm like, what advice do you have? Like, cause I've told a lot of my advice and a lot of times lately I've saved it for the academy and like, yeah.
Uh-huh. Interesting. And so when you do your like solo podcast, do you write it out? Like do you have bullet point or do you just go for it and like you have a topic and
Yeah, so I find that when I just go for it, I get a little bit more jumbled and stuff. So I write out bullet points and I'll say what I want the episode to be about, and then I'll kind of give like talk about this, tell this story, and I'll just make little bullet points. Sometimes I've written out like a whole page, but then I just get going and I talk about things out of order and it just happens. The majority of every podcast episode, the solo ones that I do, I seriously think about just setting them on fire and starting again
oh,
because I know if I do it again, I will be so much more in the flow. I'll not miss some points that I know I missed, and I know it'll be better, but I don't. I think there's been a couple where I've started and I was a couple minutes in and I was like, okay, never mind, start over. Like, but I haven't, there's not ones that I just completely have not said anything. Although like I'm very open. Like whenever I have this mic in front of me and it's just me in this room and I'm talking about advice and I have examples to give of my own personal life, I just say them and I don't even think about it half the time of like, oh, maybe this person's gonna listen to this and be like, what the like I've had people be like, you didn't say my name, but I know you were talking about me. And I'm like, well, I didn't say your name. And I'm like, I didn't know you were listening. It's like, and it doesn't matter. Nobody knows.
yeah, that's a hard one to navigate, right? So I guess like it's best sometimes not to mention names than do.
Oh,
And it's
never. Never mention names ever. Unless it's like good, unless it's something
Right.
positive.
You know Huberman Lab? You know his podcast?
No, but I've heard of him.
He's incredible. But anyways, like I think it takes him like 5 to 10 hours to record one podcast.
Really? How
Yeah.
long are his podcasts?
The podcast at times it can be, I think, like 2 hours. It's
Oh,
like an hour and
wow.
a half to 2 hours.
Yeah.
But he's so scientific that I think he like re-records it many times.
Mm.
So yeah, it's actually like it's interesting, right? Because like I know the feeling, like, especially like let's say you're recording a video and you're like, okay, I can do better, I need to do one like more and more. But then at some point the threshold it gets worse because you get burnt out. You're like, okay, no, this
Yes.
is actually not good. And now I'm just gonna use like the last one or whatever. So yeah, it's an interesting balance to find what is it that works best. And actually from the ones that are solo podcasts, I wonder if that could be a good reel content.
Oh, yeah. I need to that's my other thing. I don't like record myself doing solos on video. So,
Mm-hmm.
but I should. I should do that. But every time I'm like, it's so weird if I know I'm being recorded. Oh, I guess I'm being recorded audioly, but audioly.
Right. Like
Yeah.
doing camera.
Yeah, I also remind myself too that there's people who their whole business is their podcast, you know? Like there are a couple podcasts that I listen to that they are like full productions and stuff. So I try to give myself a little bit of grace because I have my own mural business. That is my main business. I have the academy, I have the podcast, and that's just a part of it. So when I look at other podcasts and I'm like, oh, it looks like a production. It's like they're in person and the lighting is great and they have amazing reels. And I'm like, I don't have time for that. Like I have to go do this invoice and do a mock-up for a customer and I just don't have time. And that's what I found a lot with being a mom. Like I used to do the podcast on the side, like after I was done with everything else, but it had to do with muraling. I would come home and I would record and I would do other things with the academy. And now I found that I have to do it, during the hours of 10 and 5 because I cannot do any of this afterwards and I don't want to. And so that's been a major adjustment. It's just setting time for the podcast and days for it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And then also, like, I'm going to circle back to like one of the first questions. You said get onto other people's podcasts, right? And like,
Mhm.
what was your approach to it? How did you do it?
Yeah, I've done it a couple different ways. So I've had other people pitch me. That's how I've done in the past. And I need to do that again. So virtual assistant, if you're listening, we need to do this. Thanks, Anne. Okay. Like, and it's because I get pitched for people to be on my podcast quite a bit. I'd say quite a bit. I mean, like probably 2 a month, maybe. And sometimes I look at their stuff and I'm like, okay, yeah. And I'm like, sure. So usually who's pitching them is like an agency or a virtual assistant. And so I would just have my virtual assistant write out this thing about the value that I would bring to their podcast. And that takes going on and seeing what the podcast is about. Is it a business podcast? Is it one about where they just talk about art and the painting techniques, or like what could I bring? Because I want to talk about how to build a mural business and how to make money, and that would clash on a lot of people, especially art. Like there's people talking about money in the art world is weird. A lot of it's still not mainstream. Like it's so me going on and be like, I make this much, I can show you how. And they'd be like, art isn't about making money. It's about like all the like it's just people have
No.
different. Yeah.
It's so interesting. Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm not going to jump into it because it's a whole other topic there too.
Yeah.
And when you say like you work through Kajabi, right, and like your podcast is through Kajabi, like do you also like I guess your artist academy is also on Kajabi and like your freebies are also on Kajabi?
Yep,
So
all my
everything is
sales
certified.
pages. Yep, everything is on Kajabi. All my sales pages, all of my I take payments through there. I do I sell things on the the website, everything. My email
Are your
list is
website
also
there
on there.
too?
Website, email list. Kajabi has the full thing. So if you're wanting to basically teach artists or sell anything like any digital products, then Kajabi is, I think, top of the line, and their customer service is really great.
So if your website is on there, do you also have prints on demand? Do you have that?
So my Artist Academy website is on Kajabi, but my actual artist website is through Shopify, and so they can do prints through Shopify.
I see. Got it. Okay. Thank you. So like understanding how the artist weaves in the podcast into the whole thing. All right. There was one question, but I can't. It doesn't come to me. Um, but that's pretty amazing. Thank you so much for diving deeper. And what I really love about you is that like you are really open about things, and I think that's what's again you're bringing to other artists and also women.
Yeah.
Because I see quite often men are so open about these things, they're so open about business. And now we are stepping into the era where we as women we can actually work, right? And we can do things and we can talk things. We have freedom of speech. We have the rights to work. Maybe we not paid as much as men in the industries, but we are getting there. So you actually being so upfront and sharing and giving advice that empowers other women and other artists is very, very incredible and inspiring. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thanks for coming and chatting with me. And like usually I don't go have episodes go over an hour, but this one did. So that like I just like rambled on all the things. So hopefully people find this interesting about
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Thank you so much,
Okay.
Andrea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm gonna hit